I'm going to take you through the game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Viswanathan Anand from round 1 of the Sinquefield Cup 2019. Sinquefield Cup, one of the strongest tournaments in the world, maybe the strongest this year anyway. You know, most of the best players in the world are playing, of course Magnus Carlsen, the world champion. So what can we expect from this kind of tournament with so many strong players? There are simply no weak players there at all. Well, games are going to be really tight. And that was borne out in this first round, where there were a lot of draws and even fairly short draws. I mean, players were trying, but somehow they kind of just neutralise each other. So, for example, Carlsen against Geary. Carlsen really didn't get much out of the opening and didn't press too hard. And, you know, that was a quiet draw. Carlsen said afterwards that he was happy to just play very solidly in that first game after his horror story in the Rapid and Blitz event. So anyway, I'm going to focus on the game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Viswanathan Anand. Nepo with the white pieces, playing the English, and Anand plays this sideline with bishop b4 that he's played a few times before. Actually, he rather likes this. And now the bishop goes back to e7. But black is going to try to use the fact this knight is here to sort of drive it away or maybe exchange pieces. Now, they had exactly this position a couple of weeks before in the Levitov Chess Week tournament in Amsterdam. And there Nepo played pawn to d4. In this game he played knight f3, and this is a more standard way to play it. And here the normal move is e4. Anand played a very unusual move. Knight f6, obviously well prepared. So this offers a pawn. Very interesting gambit actually. Nepo wasn't born yesterday and he didn't take it. But let's just have a very quick look. What happens if this pawn is taken? Now, black could exchange on d5. I just quite like castling here. And you can see that, well, black has a lot of open lines here. Here as well, actually. Very easy development for the pieces. Those knights are going to be exchanged off or driven away. And in the meantime, white's development on the king side is really lagging. So I think just optically, black has excellent compensation for the pawn here. But Nepo avoided that. I think the principal move here is to take the bishop, but that gives black a pretty comfortable position. Instead, Nepo went back. Now, this is a very strange situation because actually, if you count the moves, we're actually in an old Indian position where black has gained a move. So black shouldn't have any difficulty here at all. And in fact, Anand played d5 here, which is really an attempt to equalise the position straight away and is successful. There's no reason black can't break in the centre straight away. So if, for example, white exchanged on d5, then this would simply bring the queen into an excellent position here. White is a bit vulnerable on this diagonal and this diagonal. Black is already for choice in that position. But no, Nepo of course didn't do that. He didn't bring his opponent's pieces into play. Bishop f4. And basically black has equalised already. Now, of course, black would like to play c5, but then the knight would hop into b5. Bit annoying. So instead, a6 from Anand. Good move, because if this bishop moves, then perhaps you can take on c4, play b5 to hit the bishop, c5 to hit the knight, and black is gaining a lot of time. So a prudent move from Nepo. He just withdrew the knight, so that preempts c5 and puts a little bit of pressure on the pawn on d5. Black could simply protect that pawn with bishop e6. This would save a lot of time and trouble. And then after these moves, we'd repeat the position and we could all hit the bar very quickly. But no, Vishy wants to play a game. c6. It's a solid move. Keep the pawn in the middle. I think this is one of those isolated queen pawn positions where actually black doesn't have any difficulty at all. And this is a nice move. Instead of recapturing the pawn, which is of course entirely possible, knight takes. Now the point of this is that it gives the bishop this square to come onto this very nice diagonal. When this bishop has emerged very early, then you could exploit the fact that the bishop is no longer protecting b2. And the players go into an endgame. I think it's basically just roughly level, this position. And this is quite a committal move. Castles queenside from Nepo, but obviously he's worried about, you know, knight c6 and bishop f6 and hitting this pawn. Bit annoying. So he castles queenside so that the king can protect this pawn. But now we have imbalance in the position with the kings on opposite wings. Even in endgame, this actually makes quite a big difference to the position. So, solid developments. Now, interesting move, bishop g5 from Nepo. So, I think he wanted to just preempt this possibility of bishop f6. If the bishops are exchanged, positionally that's desirable because then white will have greater control over the d4 square once that dark square bishop has been exchanged off. So f6, yeah, it's a little bit annoying that the bishop no longer has this square. Now here, you know, Vichy in his old age plays quite conservatively. Bishop f5 looks like the normal move here, although I mean white is fine after bishop d3, but you know black could be a bit active. We could put the bishop here. I still think it's about equal. But Vichy plays bishop e6, super solid. Looking down at the pawn there, so the king just nudges to the side. Of course, that's where it was always going to end up. And yeah, Vichy goes rook d8 here, super solid. Just everything, you know, very efficiently placed, beautiful harmony in the position. If he wanted to be adventurous, he could actually launch those kingside pawns straight away. That's probably the most ambitious, but no, Vichy, steady as ever. Bishop c5, excellent move. Taking more control over this important blockading square. d4, so white can't establish a blockade on that square. It'd be different, you know, if we could put that bishop round on c3, the bishop back here and play knight d4, then you know white might have something. But this is good from Vichy. And king f7, right? So bishop b6, all very steady, preempting any hit on the c file. And now, having got all his pieces in the right positions, then Vichy is ready to launch his pawns forward on the king side. So he doesn't like to rush things. Now g5 is possible, but first knight e7. Interesting idea. Looking perhaps to swing this knight over to the king side. Sorry, just a second. Bishop b3. And there's a little bit of pressure here, but you can see that Vichy is so well set up. There's no problem actually. And g5, finally getting these pawns rolling. Now you could wait with white here, but you know black can build up. Maybe knight f5. So Nepo basically fixes the structure on the king side and puts the knight on d4. Now, black can't leave this knight there. That has to be exchanged off. And you can see if, let's say, pawn takes, then that knight would come to f5 looking at these. And, well, I mean, black is more than fine in that position. There's also the idea to get the bishop into e4 in some positions, careful of that pin. to hit the g2 pawn as well. So anyway, rook takes. Now, first glance you might think knight f5 could be a good move to exchange on g3, but I'm guessing that Vichy just thought this didn't give him quite enough. Yes, these pawns aren't very attractive, but then again, you know, black has isolated pawns as well, so it's probably about even actually. Instead of that, Vichy went for, instead of knight f5, he went for knight c6. And now d4, that's his idea. And this is very clever actually, because Vichy engineers a position with knight against bishop, where this bishop actually isn't terribly good. Now he's sacrificed a pawn just temporarily, but you can see that white's pieces rather tread on each other's toes, the rooks are split, whereas look at Vichy's position. Beautiful harmony. So it's not really possible to hold this pawn on d4. So for example, if rook d1, we'll go rook d5 and rook d8, and it's easy to recapture that pawn. So Nepo decides to play f3. Now I think eventually he was worried about, you know, this pawn going and then maybe a knight at some stage coming around to f5 to attack the bishop and the pawn. So he wants to sort of break things up on the king side. But this creates a few weaknesses. g2 pawn is now a bit vulnerable. So we've got level material, but black still has beautiful harmony. You know, there's always this big debate about which is better, the knight or bishop in endgames. In this case, it's interesting. The knight is superior to the bishop. Let's see why. So Vichy spurns the draw and plays on. And this is a very nice exchange. Getting rid of one of the rooks. But this allows the knight to spin into a beautiful square in the middle of the board. And now we can see, I think optically it's quite clear who stands better here. That knight fixed in the middle of the board gives the king protection. It stretches out into white's position, and that bishop really isn't very good at all. Even if white exchanges here, then the pawn would recapture, strong central pass pawn. Those pawns this side of the board really not very good. Black would stand better. So Vichy is starting to take control here. Now he played rook d6 so that he could bring his king into the the kingside pawns. So the rook just protects this. That means that after this check, which is what happened, then the king drives forward and that pawn is protected. So this is the next step. The king just gets in here, and you can see how vulnerable that pawn is. If that knight can come in and exchange itself off for the bishop, then the pawn drops and black would have a winning position. So Nepo has to take care here. And a check. And now rook e6. This is a really nice move. So he just checks the king away, but the rook is opposite the bishop now, and this sets up some nasty threats. And this is starting to get a little bit unpleasant. So let's see. Knight g6. There we go. The rook attacks the bishop. King comes back, just boots the rook out of the way, and then the knight comes in. So, okay, that little shuffle meant that the rook has just been moved away from the king side, and then Vichy is going to reset basically. Okay, that was to protect the pawn there, And now the knight comes in again, and you can see with that shuffle of pieces, the rook has moved away from the f-file, then the knight attacks the bishop, can't come back to e1 because the rook was played to the e-file. So Vichy, with that little shuffle, has made progress. Rook h7, protecting that h-pawn. This is really painstaking play by Vichy here. This is not easy to make progress, but he's playing so patiently, and not at all easy for Nepo to defend this position, actually. I think particularly with the knight, because there are always so many tricks, very hard to defend. I mean, obviously both sides have lots of different options here, but essentially the assessment of the position hasn't changed. It's simply very unpleasant for white to defend this, but also not easy to make progress, but Anand has done that. So he's finally managed to get to a position where he can take this pawn. Sorry, let me just go back a move. So we can see that if the bishop comes to f4 to protect this pawn, then the knight would come to d4. Forking king and rook, so typical. Tricks in this position, and let me tell you, Vichy is super tricky. But phase one is over. After all that manoeuvring, he's managed to actually get to a situation where he's got an extra pawn, he's got a passed h-pawn. But now actually the bishop comes into its own, because it's a superb long-range piece and it can actually defend along this diagonal. And there are so few pawns on the board. So, okay, over these next few moves, yeah, the pawn is advanced. And now there's a lot of shuffling takes place while Vichy tries to force this pawn forward, but it's absolutely not easy. Here's a nice trick. It looks at first as though white can simply keep checking here. So check behind the pawn, king goes forward, another check again. And if the king goes away here, then we can play here. So king here. Now watch what happens. It's actually not possible to take that pawn, because out of the blue, white's king is caught. King goes back and knight c4 check. So tricky. So let's go back. So that's that position there. So instead of checking on h8, rook g3. Attacking pawn and knight, so check. But slowly, slowly, Vichy is getting there. So the knight, to some extent, shields the king. And now it's actually not possible to stop that pawn advancing. My computer thinks that black should actually hang back here and maneuver with the knight, but actually I simply don't see what that would gain in the position. I think in practical terms it's best just to take this piece. I mean, I think Anand has done brilliantly to get this far, actually. So the bishop has to take the pawn, otherwise there's going to be a queen. So that's phase two over, basically. Vichy is a piece up, but there are so few pawns on the board. If white, of course, can exchange off all these pawns, then rook and knight against rook is a theoretical draw. So that's Nepo's task now, to just exchange everything off the board. So, of course, we'd like to play a5 here, but after king c5, the king comes in to take that pawn. So Anand hurries back with the knight. Now there's a threat to take here, so Anand has to exchange. Hurries back with the knight. He would like to bring his king over as well. So that threatens knight c7 check with a fork. So the rook comes to a7. And now the king comes back. If that king were over here somewhere, then black should be winning, but it's too far away. And here is the absolute crunch moment of the game. White to play, what would you do? Would you push a6? Afraid not. That's not a good move, because then we have knight c7 check and pawn takes pawn and black's pawn up. What else? Well, king c5 is the best move. And then after this, we don't play a6. That would be a mistake because of a check. And then you can play rook takes. But first you come back with the rook. And then you play a6. Now, if black tries to get cute like this, well, you could even risk losing. It should still be a draw. But that's not on. So basically black has to exchange. And then we've got this endgame of rook and knight against rook, which is a much easier draw than rook and bishop against rook. That's a very simple draw, actually. But back to this position. So a6 not possible. King c5 the best move, but instead Nepo played king c4. Just when he thought the draw was in his pocket, he makes a horrible blunder, allowing b5 check. And that wins the game. If pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, check, followed by rook takes rook. And otherwise, king takes pawn and rook takes rook. What a shocker. So Vishy said after the game, this was a shocker. I was waiting for him to make 2 correct moves and then we could shake hands. When he went to king c4, I had to check for a minute what had happened and then bam! And I went b5. I'll take it. Obviously, I'm very happy. That was Vishy after the game. Yeah. Well, do you know what? He worked incredibly hard. Both players worked incredibly hard. I'm sorry for Nepo. But Vishy, I think, got what he deserved in the end. So he was the only player to win in the first round of the Sinquefield Cup. Let's see how things develop over the next few rounds. Thanks for watching.